Alright, in this video, you all are going to learn about the basics of blood so that when we go into the crime scene, we know what we are dealing with. So let's first talk about what makes up our blood. What are the main components that are in our blood? And there are four that I want you to know. The first of which are the red blood cells, which are known as erythrocytes. Now, these are the most abundant cells in our blood. They are produced in the bone marrow and contain a protein called hemoglobin that carries oxygen to our cells. So, we are going to be dealing with red blood cells quite a bit because they're the most abundant and they play a big role in determining blood types. The second major component of blood cells are going to be your white blood cells, which are otherwise known as leukocytes. Now, these white blood cells are part of the immune system and they help destroy infectious agents called pathogens. So they play a big role in protecting us against infection and things that don't belong in our body. The third major component is called plasma. This is the yellowish liquid portion of blood, and it contains things such as electrolytes, nutrients and vitamins, hormones, clotting factors, and proteins such as antibodies to also help fight infection. Now, antibodies are also going to play a big role when we talk about blood typing and donating different types of blood. And last but not least, the fourth major component of blood cells are your platelets, otherwise known as thrombocytes. Okay, the clotting factors that are carried in the plasma. This is what platelets are. They clot together in a process called coagulation to seal wounds and prevent loss of blood. So when you accidentally cut yourself, these platelets will clot and seal that wound. Okay, so make sure you know these four major components of the blood because we're going to be dealing with some of them as we go through this unit. So let's talk about some interesting blood facts. Okay, the average adult has about 5 liters of blood inside their body, which makes up about 7 to 8% of their body weight. So we have a lot of blood that is inside of our body, as you can see. Blood is a living tissue that carries oxygen and nutrients to all parts of the body, and it carries carbon dioxide and other waste products back to the lungs, kidneys, and liver for disposal. Blood is helpful in the fight against infection and helps heal wounds so that we can stay healthy. Finally, some interesting numbers. There are about 1 billion red blood cells in 2 to 3 drops of blood. So if you think about it, just 2 to 3 small drops of blood contain a billion red cells. And for every 600 of those red blood cells, there are about 40 platelets and white blood cell. So as you can see, red blood cells make up the vast majority. They're the most abundant in our blood. So some interesting facts about blood just to consider as we go through. Now, when it comes to blood types, we're going to play or take a look at genetics and how that plays a role in determining your blood type. So your blood type is established before you are born by specific genes inherited from your parents. Now we know that you inherit genes from your parents, one from your mother and one from your father. So it is actually these genes that you get from your parents that determine your blood type. These genes determine your blood type by causing proteins called antigens to exist on the surface of all of your red blood cells. So I mentioned before we were going to be talking about red blood cells quite a bit in regards to blood types, and this is where This word antigen is one that you are going to see over and over again. So they are the blood proteins that exist on the surface of the red blood cells, and they determine your blood type. So what exactly are blood types? So later on, we are going to be learning about DNA. Okay, so we know where we get our genes from. Well, specifically, there are 3 alleles or genes for blood type called A, B, and O. Since we have 2 genes, one from your mother and one from your father, there are 6 possible combinations. Now, these 6 combinations you can see over in the box on the right-hand side. Okay, so 6 different combinations of genes result in 4 different blood types in the ABO blood system. There are different types of blood systems that can be considered, but the one that we're going to look at for the most part is the ABO. So if your genes are either AA or AO, you have type A blood. If your 2 genes are BB or BO, then you have what is type B blood. If your 2 genes are OO, then you have type O blood. And last but not least, if you have type AB blood, your 2 genes are A and B. So remember, these genes come from your parent. Each one of you has 2 genes which result in one of these 4 blood types. Now, this picture here down below, we are going to be looking at over and over again, but I mentioned before the antigens are on the surface of the red blood cell, and they determine your blood type. We also have these things called antibodies that are also in our blood, but more specifically, they're in the plasma, and they are always the opposite type of your antigen. Okay, so we're going to be taking a closer look at this later on, but I want you to be familiar with those words, antigens, antibodies, and how they are used to determine your blood type. So how common are these different blood types? Well, we have the 4 combinations, O, AB, A, and B. There's also another factor that is going to play a role, the positive and the negative. But as you can see, the most common blood type with about 46% is type O blood. Okay, it is very common, almost half the population. Type A comes in next at about 38.8%. Type B is a little bit over 11%. And then type AB comes to about 4%. So type O is the most common. Type AB is the least common. Okay, so some of you may actually know your blood type. If you've ever donated blood before, you might have received that information. One of the big things to know about blood types, and you might have learned about this if you took anatomy and physiology, is blood transfusions. So when somebody is injured and they need blood to be given, this is called a blood transfusion. So they are usually done to replace blood lost during surgery or a serious injury. Could also be done if there's some sort of illness that is preventing the person's body to make blood properly. Now, one of the big things and reasons to know your blood type is some blood can only be given to other people, and other types will be rejected. It can actually be quite harmful to that person. So let's talk about some things that I want you to know. People with type O blood are called universal donors because they can give blood to any blood type. Okay, you can see that in the picture on the right. If you have type O blood, you can give it to any other person, including yourself. You can always give blood to the same type. Also in the picture, we see type AB at the bottom, and everybody is giving their blood to that person. That is because type AB is known as the universal recipient, so they can receive any blood type. Okay, so I want you to be familiar with these blood types and who can give to who. Okay, if the arrow does not go in the opposite direction, then that person cannot give that blood. So for example, a person with type AB blood cannot give it to type O. In fact, type O can only give to, or can only receive from itself. Now, I mentioned before that there's another factor, and this is called the Rh factor. So scientists study rhesus monkeys to learn more about human anatomy and the comparisons between humans and monkeys. So while studying this specific species, the rhesus monkey, there was a certain blood protein that was discovered, and this protein is also present in the blood of some people, but other humans don't have the protein. The presence of the protein or lack of it is called the Rh, or the rhesus factor. So if your blood does contain the protein, your blood is said to be Rh positive. If your blood does not contain the protein, your blood is said to be Rh negative. So this is another specific type of antigen or protein that is on the surface of the red blood cell. If you have it, you are considered positive. If you don't have it, it is considered negative. It is not good or bad one way or the other. So when we add in this addition to the 4 original blood types we learned about, there's actually 8 different types that a person can be in the ABO system, which are listed on the right hand side here. So for example, you can be A positive or A negative. Okay. The positive and the negative also plays a role in who can donate blood to whom. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about over this unit is how is blood used as evidence and why is it so useful? So the first reason is a small sample of blood can be analyzed to determine somebody's blood type. It could be used to find their DNA, which can then be matched to possible suspects. Okay, if we know somebody's blood type, that would be an example of a type of class evidence, because there are different types, but that can help narrow it down. Okay, if we can get their DNA, that would be an example of individual evidence. Another really helpful way that we're going to look at blood are blood droplets. So they can be analyzed to give clues to the location of a crime, movement of a victim, and what type of weapon was used. Okay, so we can actually analyze the blood droplets that are left behind to look at, for example, where was the crime? Where did it take place? Was the victim moving, perhaps? And then the major thing with blood is blood spatter. Okay, really pay attention. It's not blood splatter, but blood spatter. There's no L. Well, it can be analyzed to determine the patterns that give investigators clues to how a crime might have happened. Okay, later on in this unit, we'll take a closer look at blood spatter and what type of patterns are out there and what can actually be learned about what happened at the crime scene. Okay, if you know about Dexter or have watched Dexter, he is a blood spatter analyst, and this is what he does as a job. He analyzes blood and determines what happened. Okay, the last thing that I want to leave you with is just what blood looks like under the microscope. Okay, down in the middle on the bottom row, we can see what human blood looks like under a microscope. But interestingly, not all animals have the same blood or have the same type of blood as we can see here. So you can see the different species and what their blood looks like. So I just want to leave you with that as we learn about some of the basics of blood.